The hammer fell against red-hot steel with precise strikes. James Danner worked the metal in his garage, each blow calculated and controlled. Sparks danced in the November air as he shaped what would become a custom carving knife, a Thanksgiving gift he'd planned for weeks. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. The familiar rhythm of metalwork cleared his mind, same as it had during his roughest days after coming home from Afghanistan. Steel didn't lie. Steel didn't scheme. Steel responded to honest work. "James!" Ruby's voice cut through the garage like a blade. "Get in here. We have guests coming in 2 hours, and nothing's ready." He set down the hammer and wiped his hands on a worn shop rag. Through the open garage door, he could see their house, a modest 2-story in Fort Collins that Ruby constantly complained wasn't good enough. The kind of home most families would be grateful for, but Ruby always wanted more. James walked through the kitchen door to find chaos. Ruby stood at the counter, her blonde hair pulled back tight, phone pressed between her ear and shoulder while she chopped vegetables with angry precision. "No, I can't reschedule," she snapped into the phone. "This has to happen today." She ended the call and turned to James, her blue eyes flashing with irritation. "Where have you been?" "I've been doing everything myself." "Working on your knife," James said, keeping his voice level. "The one you asked for." Ruby's expression softened for exactly 2 seconds. "Oh, right. That's sweet." Her phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen and quickly flipped it face down on the counter. James noticed. He'd been noticing a lot lately. "Who's calling?" he asked. "Work stuff. You know how it is." Ruby turned back to the vegetables, but her movements were jerky now. Nervous, Oliver appeared in the kitchen doorway, his dark hair hanging in his eyes. At 16, he'd inherited James's build and quiet intensity, but something was eating at the kid. James could see it in the tight line of his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched when he looked at his mother. "Mom, Samantha's upstairs crying," Oliver said. "She won't tell me why." Ruby waved a hand dismissively. "She's being dramatic. You know how she gets." James studied his son's face. Oliver's eyes met his for a brief moment, and James saw something their knowledge. Fear. The kind of look a soldier got when he knew the enemy was close, but couldn't pinpoint the threat. "I'll talk to her," James said. "No time," Ruby interrupted. "The Keeners will be here soon, and Aunt Lydia, and your brother." "God, I can't believe you invited Hank. He's probably drunk already." James felt his jaw tighten. "Hank's been clean for 6 months, right? Until today." Ruby's phone buzzed again. This time she grabbed it quickly, read the message, and typed a rapid response. "Who's texting you?" Oliver asked, his voice sharper than usual. Ruby's head snapped up. "Excuse me. Your phone. It's been going off all day." "That's none of your business, young man." James watched the exchange with growing unease. Oliver had always been respectful to his mother, even when she pushed his buttons. But now the kid looked like he wanted to say something that would burn the house down. "Oliver," James said quietly, "help me finish the knife." 20 minutes. His son nodded and followed him back to the garage. As soon as they were alone, Oliver grabbed James's arm. "Dad, we need to talk. Not here. Not now. But soon." "What's wrong?" Oliver glanced toward the house, then shook his head. "I can't. Not yet. But promise me when I tell you, you'll listen. Really listen." James studied his son's face. Whatever Oliver knew, it was big, and it was eating him alive. "I promise." Ruby's voice carried from the kitchen. "James, they're here." Through the window, James watched Michael Keener's black BMW pull into their driveway, followed by Aunt Lydia's old Honda. The BMW cost more than most people made in a year, which was odd, considering Michael worked in corporate consulting. James had never liked the man, and not just because of his oily smile and expensive suits. There was something off about Michael Keener, something that made James's instincts scream danger. Tess Keener climbed out of the passenger seat, her movements careful and controlled. She was a beautiful woman, but there was a brittleness to her, like glass ready to shatter. James had always wondered what kept her married to Michael. Aunt Lydia emerged from her Honda, a sharp-faced woman in her 60s who'd never approved of James's marriage to her niece. She'd always thought Ruby could do better than a simple soldier, and she'd never been shy about expressing that opinion. Showtime, Oliver muttered. They walked back into the house as the guests approached the front door. Ruby had somehow transformed from harried housewife to perfect hostess in the span of 2 minutes. Her smile was bright, her posture relaxed, her voice warm as she opened the door. Michael, Tess, Aunt Lydia, come in, come in. Michael stepped inside first, his presence filling the room like smoke. He was tall and lean, with silver hair and sharp features. Everything about him screamed money and power, and to James, both were weapons in the wrong hands. Aunt Lydia followed, her critical eyes sweeping over the house's modest interior. Ruby, dear, the place looks cozy. It wasn't a compliment. Ruby, you look amazing, Michael said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. The contact lasted a beat too long. James felt his muscles tense. James! Michael extended a hand. Good to see you again. James shook it, noting the man's soft grip and manicured nails. Michael, how's the metal shop business? Still playing with fire? Michael's smile didn't reach his eyes. Still making things that last, James replied. Tess stepped forward, her smile genuine but tired. James, thank you for having us. The house looks beautiful. That's all, Ruby, James said, watching as his wife and Michael exchanged another glance. Quick, but loaded with meaning, Samantha appeared on the stairs, her face puffy from crying. At 14, she still had that innocent trust in people that James both loved and worried about. In a world full of Michael Keeners, trust could get you killed. Hi, Mr. and Mrs. Keener, she said softly. There's our little artist, Michael said. Still painting those pretty pictures? Samantha nodded and moved closer to James. He put a protective arm around her shoulders. The front door opened again, and Uncle Hank walked in. James's older brother looked good, clear eyes, steady hands, clean clothes. 6 months sober was the longest stretch Hank had managed in years. Sorry I'm late, Hank said. Traffic was murder. He paused when he saw the guests. Michael, Tess, Lydia, Hank. Michael's voice cooled by several degrees. Didn't expect to see you here. Aunt Lydia's expression soured further. I thought this was a family dinner. Family dinner, Hank said simply, his jaw tightening. He looked at James. Thanks for inviting me, brother. Ruby's smile became strained. Well, now that everyone's here, why don't we all sit down? Dinner's almost ready. As they moved toward the dining room, James caught Hank's eye. His brother raised an eyebrow, slightly a question. James nodded toward Michael and Ruby, then gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. Hank had spent 15 years as a corrections officer before his drinking cost him a job. He knew how to read people, how to spot lies and hidden agendas. And right now, James needed someone else to see what he was seeing. The dinner was a performance. Ruby played the perfect hostess, Michael the charming guest, Tess the grateful friend. But underneath the surface, currents of tension flowed like electricity. James watched Michael's hand brush Ruby's as she served dessert. Watched his wife's face flush when Michael complimented the meal. Watched Oliver push food around his plate, his eyes dark with knowledge he couldn't or wouldn't share. When Ruby's phone buzzed for the dozenth time, Michael was the first to speak. Popular woman tonight, he said with a laugh. Work never stops, Ruby replied, but she didn't check the message. What kind of work requires so much attention on Thanksgiving? Hank asked, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. Ruby's smile flickered. Insurance. You know how it is. James didn't know. Ruby worked part-time processing claims for a local agency. Nothing urgent. Nothing that required constant communication. Maybe you should turn it off, James suggested. Enjoy your family. For just a moment, Ruby's mask slipped. James saw something cold and calculating in her eyes before the warmth returned. You're right, she said, powering down the phone with theatrical flair. Family comes first. But James noticed Michael check his own phone twice in the next 10 minutes. After dinner, the adults settled in the living room, while James helped clear dishes. Oliver appeared at his elbow, movements quick and nervous. Dad, I need to show you something. You and Sam. In the pantry. What? Please. Just trust me. Oliver's voice was barely a whisper, but the urgency was unmistakable. James glanced toward the living room, where Ruby was serving coffee and Michael was telling some story about a business trip. Tess sat quietly in the corner, her hands folded in her lap like a woman attending her own funeral. "Samantha," James called softly. "Come help us with something." His daughter looked up from her sketchbook, confused but obedient. The three of them slipped into the walk-in pantry, a narrow space lined with shelves and just barely big enough for all of them. Oliver pulled the door almost closed, leaving just a crack. "Don't say anything," he whispered. "Just listen." They stood in the dark, pressed against canned goods and boxes of cereal. James was about to ask what the hell was going on when he heard footsteps in the kitchen. "Two sets. Are you sure about this?" Ruby's voice low and tense. "Everything's in place." Michael's voice closer now. "The fuse is set. Gas will fill the basement by morning. One spark from that stupid heater and it's over. Insurance pays out and we walk." James felt the world tilt. Beside him, Samantha made a small sound of distress. He put a hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently to keep her quiet, while ice water flooded his veins. "What about the kids?" Ruby asked. "Collateral damage. Can't be helped. I know, but—" "Ruby." Michael's voice was sharp now. "You want out of this life or not? You want to keep living in this dump, married to a broken-down soldier who builds pretty knives for a living? Or do you want something better?" There was a pause. When Ruby spoke again, her voice was steady. "Cole, you're right. It has to be done. The timer's set for 4 a.m. Gas leak will be undetectable until it's too late. Old water heater throws a spark, boom. Tragic accident. War hero dies in his sleep, along with his loving family." James's hands clenched into fists. Every muscle in his body screamed for action, for violence, for justice. But he forced himself to remain still. To listen, to learn. "The insurance money?" Ruby asked. $2 million in life insurance, plus another $500,000 on the house. "Split between us. That's enough to start over somewhere warm. Somewhere better. What about Tess?" Michael laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Tess won't be a problem much longer. Trust me." More footsteps. Moving away now, back toward the living room, in the darkness of the pantry, James felt something fundamental shift inside him. The woman he'd loved, married, built a life which she wanted him dead. Wanted his children dead. For money. For a man like Michael Keener. Beside him, Samantha was crying silently. Oliver stood rigid, his breathing shallow and quick. James waited until the kitchen was quiet again before pushing open the pantry door. The three of them stood blinking in the sudden light, processing what they'd heard. "Dad!" Samantha's voice was small and broken. James pulled both his children close, his mind already working through the implications. Ruby had always been ambitious, always wanted more than their modest life could provide. But this? Planning murder? Planning to kill her own children? "We're going to fix this," he said quietly. Oliver pulled back to look at him. "Ow!" James thought of his years in Afghanistan, of missions that required patience and precision, of enemies who smiled to your face while planning to put a knife in your back. "Carefully," he said. James returned to the living room wearing the same calm expression he perfected during his military service. Ruby was laughing at something Michael had said, her head thrown back in apparent delight. She looked beautiful and carefree and utterly without conscience. "Everything all right?" she asked when she saw him. "Fine. Just helping the kids with something." Hank's eyes found his across the room. His brother had always been able to read him, even during the worst of his drinking years. Now those sharp blue eyes narrowed slightly, picking up on some signal James wasn't even aware he was sending. The evening wound down with painful normalcy. Hugs and thank yous and promises to get together again soon. Michael shook James's hand again, his smile confident and predatory. "Take care of yourself, James," he said. "Never know what might happen." After the guests left, James helped Ruby clean up while Oliver and Samantha retreated upstairs. Ruby hummed as she worked, seemingly without a care in the world. "Nice evening," she said. "Yeah. Michael's doing well for himself. That new car must have cost a fortune." James dried a plate with mechanical precision. "Where does that money come from, exactly?" Ruby paused. "What do you mean?" "Corporate consulting." "What does he actually do?" "I don't know. Business stuff." "Why are you asking?" James met her eyes in the reflection of the kitchen window. Just curious. She resumed washing dishes, but her movements had lost their easy rhythm. At midnight, James lay in bed listening to Ruby breathe beside him. Her sleep seemed genuine, but he'd learned not to trust anything about her anymore. When he was certain she wouldn't wake, he slipped out of bed and padded downstairs to the basement. The smell hit him immediately: natural gas, faint but unmistakable. James found the water heater in the corner, an old unit that Ruby had been after him to replace for months. Now he understood why a thin copper tube ran from the main gas line to a small device hidden behind the heater. A timer set for 4 a.m. In 3.5 hours, gas would begin flooding the basement. By morning, the house would be a bomb waiting for a single spark. James photographed everything with his phone: the device, the timer setting, the modified gas line. Then he carefully disconnected the timer and sealed the gas leak with electrical tape. To anyone checking later, it would look like the device had malfunctioned, but he left everything else in place. Let them think their plan was still active. Upstairs, he quietly packed a bag for Oliver and drove to his friend Dave's house across town. Dave Martinez had served with James in Afghanistan and asked no questions when James showed up at 2 a.m. with his son. "Oliver stays here until I call," James said. "Don't let him go anywhere. Don't let anyone know he's here." "Roger that," Dave said. "What's the threat? The kind that kills families in their sleep?" Dave nodded grimly. "I've got it covered." Next stop was Ruby's sister Linda, who lived an hour south in Boulder. Samantha cried when James woke her, confused and frightened. "I don't understand," she whispered as he buckled her seatbelt. "Why can't I stay home?" "Because home isn't safe right now, sweetheart, but it will be soon." Linda took Samantha without question, though she peppered James with concerns he couldn't address. "Is this about Ruby?" she asked quietly while Samantha gathered her things. James met Linda's eyes. Ruby's sister had never liked him much, but she wasn't stupid. She'd seen the cracks in their marriage, the way Ruby's ambitions had grown beyond their means. "Yes," he said simply. "I always wondered," Linda murmured. "The money thing, the way she talks sometimes, like she's owed something better." By 3:30 a.m., James was back home. Ruby still slept peacefully, unaware that her children were safe and her plan was ruined. James sat in his kitchen and called the one person who would understand what came next. "Hank, it's James. I need your help." His brother's voice was instantly alert despite the hour. "What's wrong?" "You were right about her. I need to catch a killer." There was a pause. Then, "I'll be right over." Hank arrived as the first gray light of dawn touched the windows. James met him at the door with coffee and grim purpose. "She tried to kill us," James said without preamble. "Gas leak, time for this morning. Her and Michael Keener." Hank's face went stone cold. "You sure?" "Oliver heard them planning it. I found the device." James showed him the photos on his phone. Hank studied each image with a professional eye. "This is sophisticated. Military-grade timer. Someone knew what they were doing. The insurance money. $2.5 million total. Motive, means, opportunity." Hank set down his coffee cup. "What do you need?" James had spent the sleepless hours since moving his children to safety thinking through every angle. In Afghanistan, patience and preparation had kept his squad alive through 3 tours. The same principles applied here. Evidence. Enough to bury them both. "Ruby's awake," Hank observed, nodding toward the ceiling where footsteps moved overhead. James listened to his wife's morning routine: shower, hair, makeup, getting ready to play the grieving widow, except her family hadn't died as planned. "James!" Ruby's voice called down the stairs. "Is that your brother I hear?" "Yeah, he stayed the night." Ruby appeared in the kitchen wearing her robe, her hair perfect despite, supposedly, just waking up. She looked surprised to see them both sitting there with coffee and serious expressions. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Where are the kids?" "Oliver's at Dave's. Sam's with Linda." Ruby's face shifted through several expressions: confusion, concern, then something harder to read. "What?" "Thought they could use a change of scenery after yesterday. Without telling me." James met her eyes steadily. "Emergency decision." For just a moment, Ruby looked genuinely angry. Then the mask slipped back into place. "Well, I suppose that's fine. Give us some time alone." She moved to the coffee maker, her movements casual but her shoulders tense. I should go, Hank said, reading the room. Thanks for the coffee, James. He paused at the door. Call me if you need anything, day or night. After Hank left, Ruby turned to face James. What was that about? What? The way you two were looking at each other. Like you were sharing some secret. James sipped his coffee, keeping his expression neutral. Hank's worried about me. Thinks I've been under stress lately. Have you? Wouldn't you be? If your wife was planning to murder you for insurance money. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Ruby's face went very still. That's not funny, James. Wasn't meant to be. Ruby stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for signs of knowledge or suspicion. Finding neither, she forced a laugh. Your brother's been filling your head with paranoid nonsense. Has he? You know how Hank gets. Always sees conspiracies everywhere. James nodded slowly. You're probably right. But Ruby's phone was buzzing again, and this time when she checked it, her face went pale. Problem? James asked. No, just work stuff. She typed a quick response and shoved the phone in her robe pocket. I think I'll visit my mother today. Give you some space to decompress. Good idea. Ruby went upstairs to dress, and James immediately called Oliver. Dad, I need you to access your mother's phone remotely. That backup system you set up last year, can you still get in? Yeah, but why? Because we're going to find out exactly what she's been hiding. Oliver was silent for a moment. She really tried to kill us, didn't she? Yes. I'll get the data. While Ruby was gone, James worked with methodical precision. He planted a GPS tracker in her car, a device small enough to hide under the dashboard. He installed hidden cameras in 3 key locations: the kitchen, living room, and her home office. When Hank returned that afternoon, he brought equipment of his own. Audio surveillance, he explained, showing James tiny wireless microphones. Had a buddy in the sheriff's department hook me up. These are admissible if we catch them planning another crime. They placed the devices carefully, one in Ruby's car, one in the kitchen where she seemed to have most of her private conversations. Oliver called that evening with the first real breakthrough. Dad, I'm on her phone. You need to see this. What did you find? Messages. Lots of them. And photos. Dad, she forged your signature on insurance documents. Life insurance worth $2 million. James felt cold rage settle in his chest like a stone. Send me everything. There's more. Search history going back months. How to mimic gas leak. Can PTSD be used to declare someone unfit? Dad, she's been planning this for a long time. Keep digging. I want everything, every message, every call, every search. When Ruby returned home that evening, she seemed nervous. She kept checking her phone and looking out windows as if expecting someone. How was your mother? James asked. Fine. The usual complaints. Ruby poured herself a glass of wine, her hand slightly unsteady. Maybe we should take a vacation soon. Get away for a while. Where? Somewhere warm. Maybe. Mexico. James nodded thoughtfully. A country without extradition treaties with the United States. How convenient. Sounds nice. When were you thinking? Soon. Maybe next week. Short notice. Ruby's smile was brittle. Sometimes the best trips are spontaneous. That night, James lay awake listening to Ruby sleep beside him. Tomorrow, he would begin phase 2 of his plan. It was time to make the hunters become the hunted. Ruby's behavior over the next few days confirmed everything James suspected. She became bolder, more confident, as if the failed gas leak had been just a minor setback rather than attempted murder. She started small casual comments to neighbors about James seeming unstable lately. Mentions of his military service and everything he'd been through. She painted herself as a concerned wife dealing with a troubled veteran. James let her talk at the grocery store. He overheard her conversation with Beth Morrison, a neighbor who'd never liked him much anyway. I'm just worried, Ruby said, her voice carrying the perfect note of concerned wife. Since he got back from Afghanistan, he's been different. Angry. Paranoid. Sometimes I think he sees enemies everywhere. Have you considered counseling? Beth asked. I've tried, but you know how proud these military men are. He won't admit there's a problem. James emerged from the next aisle over, and both women went quiet. Ruby's smile was warm and loving. There you are, honey. I was just telling Beth about your new knife project. Was she? James kept his voice mild, but Beth shifted uncomfortably under his stare. Well, I should go, Beth said quickly. Nice seeing you both. After she left, Ruby linked her arm through James's. What took you so long? I was starting to worry. Traffic, James said. But that evening, he found out exactly what Ruby had been doing while he was stuck in traffic. The GPS tracker showed she'd driven across town to Michael Keener's office building. The timestamp from Oliver's phone monitoring showed a 15-minute call to Michael during the same period. 2 days later, Ruby escalated her campaign. She called 911 from the kitchen while James was in the garage, her voice shaking with manufactured fear. Please, I need help. My husband, he's been having episodes since he came back from the war. Tonight, he got angry and started throwing things. I'm scared he might hurt me or the children. James heard every word through the hidden microphone Hank had placed in the kitchen. He silently activated his phone's recording function, capturing Ruby's performance for posterity. The police arrived within 10 minutes. James met them at the front door, calm and composed, while Ruby played the terrified wife behind him. Officers, I'm not sure what this is about, James said. Your wife called about a domestic disturbance. Said you were throwing things, threatening her. James gestured toward the spotless kitchen. As you can see, nothing's been thrown. Nothing's been broken. The officers looked around, clearly finding no evidence of the incident Ruby had described. One of them, a veteran himself, studied James's face with recognition. You served, he asked. 3 tours Afghanistan. The officer nodded. Thank you for your service. He turned to Ruby. Ma'am, we're not seeing any evidence of what you described. Ruby's eyes filled with tears. He cleaned up after. He always cleans up after. But the officers weren't buying it. They asked a few more questions, took notes, and left with obvious skepticism about Ruby's claims. Building her case, Hank observed when James showed him the recording later. Classic manipulation. Plant doubt about your mental state. Establish a pattern of erratic behavior. Then what? Then something happens. You have an episode. Maybe you threaten her. Maybe you hurt yourself. Either way, she comes out looking like the victim. James's phone buzzed with a text from Oliver. New messages from Michael. They're meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. Someplace called Riverside Cafe. Time to up the ante, James said. The next day, James followed Ruby's car from a distance as she drove to the cafe. He parked across the street with a clear view of the outdoor seating area where she met Michael Keener. Through binoculars, he watched their body language intimate, familiar, comfortable. This wasn't just about money. They were lovers. Had been for a while, judging by how naturally Michael's hand found hers across the table. James activated the audio receiver Hank had given him, tuning into the frequency of a microphone in Ruby's car. The range was limited, but if they moved the conversation to her vehicle, he'd hear every word. 20 minutes later, they did exactly that. Can't wait much longer, Michael was saying as they settled into Ruby's car. The longer we delay, the more suspicious it looks. I know, but he's not cooperating. He won't take the bait. What do you mean? Ruby's voice was frustrated. I've been dropping hints about his mental state for weeks, trying to get him to snap, to do something I can report. But he just watches me, like he knows something. Impossible. If he knew, he'd have done something by now. Would he? This is James we're talking about. He doesn't react, he plans. Remember what you told me about Afghanistan? How he always waited for the perfect moment to strike. There was silence in the car. Then Michael's voice, colder now. Are you getting second thoughts? No, but I think we need a different approach. Like what? Make him the aggressor. Force him into a situation where he has to react violently. Then I call 911, claim domestic abuse, get a restraining order. And then, Ruby's laugh was sharp and cold. Then he has an accident while violating the restraining order. Self-defense. Much cleaner than a gas leak. James felt his finger tighten on the binoculars. The urge to cross the street, yank Michael out of the car, and beat him to death was almost overwhelming. But that was exactly what they wanted. James losing control, giving them ammunition. Instead, he took pictures, documented everything, let them dig their graves deeper. When? Michael asked. Tonight. I'll provoke him at dinner, push his buttons until he snaps. You'll be waiting outside in case I need backup. What about the kids? Still gone. Perfect timing. James drove home ahead of Ruby and spent the afternoon preparing. He adjusted the hidden cameras to capture the best angles of the kitchen and living room. He tested the audio equipment to ensure clear recording. Then he called Oliver. Your mother's going to try to provoke me tonight. Make me lose my temper so she can claim abuse. I need you to monitor everything remotely. If something goes wrong, call 911 and then call Hank. Dad, maybe you should just leave. Come stay here with Dave and me. No, this ends tonight, one way or another. Ruby came home at 5 o'clock, her mood artificially bright. She cooked James's favorite meal pot roast with potatoes and carrots. The condemned man's last supper. You seem happy, James observed over dinner. I am. I've been thinking about what you said about us needing more quality time together. Ruby reached across the table to touch his hand. Maybe we should plan that vacation. Just the two of us. What about the kids? They can stay with family. We need time to reconnect. James nodded. Mexico. How did you guess? Mexico sounds perfect. They finished dinner in relative peace. James complimented the meal. Ruby smiled and laughed at appropriate moments. To any observer, they looked like a normal married couple enjoying a quiet evening together. Then Ruby opened the bottle of wine to be by the third glass of wine. Ruby had transformed. Gone was the loving wife, replaced by someone harder and more calculating. She picked at James like a scab she couldn't leave alone. You know what I was thinking about today? She said, swirling wine in her glass. How different our lives could have been. How so? If you'd stayed in the military. Made a real career of it instead of coming home to play with scrap metal. James kept his voice level. I thought you wanted me to come home. I did. At first. But that was before I realized what home would actually look like. Ruby gestured around their kitchen with obvious disdain. This house. This neighborhood. This life. It's a good life. For who? You hide in your garage all day making pretty toys for rich people while I work a dead-end job processing insurance claims. Those insurance claims seem pretty important to you lately. Ruby's eyes sharpened. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Just an observation. God, you're paranoid. You think everything means something. Just like your crazy brother. James felt the first stirring of real anger. Hank's not crazy, isn't he? An alcoholic ex-con who sees conspiracies everywhere. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it? Careful, Ruby. Or what? You'll hit me? Is that what this is building to? The war hero finally snaps and beats his wife. James realized what she was doing, trying to provoke exactly the reaction she could use against him. He forced his hands to remain steady on his coffee cup. I would never hit you. No. Then what about this? Ruby stood and swept her arm across the counter, sending dishes crashing to the floor. What about when I do this? She grabbed a framed photo of their family and hurled it at the wall. Glass exploded across the kitchen floor. Ruby, stop. Make me. She was screaming now, her face flushed with wine and artificial rage. Come on, James. Show me what a big, strong soldier does when his wife makes him angry. James stood slowly, his movements careful and controlled. You're drunk. I'm honest. For the first time in years, I'm being honest. Ruby grabbed another glass from the counter and threw it. This one shattered against the refrigerator, sending shards flying. The neighbors will hear. Good. Let them hear what you're really like. Let them hear how you terrorize your own family. But James had noticed something Ruby hadn't, a shadow moving past the kitchen window. Right on schedule. The doorbell rang. Ruby's face lit up with vicious satisfaction. Sounds like someone's concerned about all the noise. Wonder what they'll think when they see the mess you made. James walked to the front door and found Tess Keener standing on his porch, her face pale and anxious. Tess, what brings you by? I heard. Is everything all right? It sounded like glass breaking. Behind him, Ruby appeared in the hallway, her hair mussed and her eyes wild. Tess, thank God you're here. James he lost his temper, and Ruby gestured helplessly at the mess in the kitchen, the broken dishes and scattered glass. To anyone looking, it would seem obvious who was responsible. Tess looked between them, confusion clear on her face. James, maybe I should call someone. That won't be necessary, James said quietly. Tess, I think you and I should talk. Privately. I don't think. About your husband, and what he's been doing with my wife. The words hit Tess like a physical blow. Her face went white, then red, then white again. Ruby stepped forward. James, what are you? The cafe this afternoon, James continued, his eyes locked on Tess. Riverside Cafe at 2 o'clock. They've been meeting there for months. Tess's composure cracked. You're lying. Am I? Ask yourself why Michael insisted you come here tonight. Why he's sitting in his car down the block right now, waiting for you to call and report that I've hurt my wife. Tess turned to look through the window, and James saw the exact moment she spotted Michael's BMW parked under a streetlight 3 houses down. You bastard, she whispered, but she wasn't talking to James. Ruby tried to salvage the situation. Tess, don't listen to him. He's been having episodes, saying crazy things. Shut up. Tess's voice was ice cold. She looked at James. What exactly do you know? Everything. The gas leak. The insurance money. The plan to kill me and my children. Tess staggered as if he'd hit her. Children. Collateral damage, James said, quoting Michael's words from the pantry. That's how your husband described my kids. Oh my God. Tess sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. Oh my God. I knew he was cheating, but I never thought. Murder? Ruby made a move toward the door, but James stepped in front of her. Going somewhere. This is insane. You're both insane. James pulled out his phone and played the audio recording from that afternoon. Ruby and Michael's voices filled the room, crystal clear, discussing how to provoke James into violence, how to make his death look like self-defense. When the recording ended, Tess looked up at Ruby with naked hatred. You were going to kill his children. Tess, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're a monster. Tess stood, her hands shaking with rage. And so is my husband. James felt a shift in the room's dynamics. Tess Keener had just become an ally instead of an enemy. I need your help, he said quietly. To do what? To make sure they both pay for this. Tess looked out the window again at Michael's car, then back at Ruby, who was still trying to maintain her innocent act. What do you need me to do? James smiled grimly. We're a wire. The next morning, Tess sat in Hank's kitchen while he fitted her with a small recording device. Her hands shook as she lifted her coffee cup, but her voice was steady. What if he suspects something? He won't, James said. He thinks you're just a naive wife who doesn't know what's really going on. How wrong he is. Tessa's laugh was bitter. I've known Michael was cheating for years. I just never cared enough to do anything about it. What changed? You said children. Your children. Tess met his eyes. I lost a baby once. 5 years ago. Michael said it was for the best, that we weren't ready for kids, that it would interfere with his career plans. But I wanted that baby. James saw the pain in her face, the grief that Michael had probably dismissed as female weakness. He took that from me, Tess continued. And now I find out he was willing to kill someone else's children for money? No, this ends today. Hank finished adjusting the wire. You're all set. Remember, we need her to say something incriminating about the original plan and the new plan. Get her talking about the gas leak, the insurance money, anything that shows premeditation. Tess nodded. I can do this. She called Ruby that afternoon, claiming she needed to talk about Michael's strange behavior lately. They agreed to meet at Ruby's house at 3 o'clock. James and Hank positioned themselves in the garage, close enough to monitor the audio feed, but far enough away to avoid detection. Oliver, still safely hidden at Dave's house, tracked the conversation on his laptop. At 3 o'clock sharp, Tess knocked on the front door. Tess, come in. Ruby's voice came through clearly on the audio feed. You sounded upset on the phone. I'm upset. It's about Michael. What about him? There was a pause, the sound of footsteps moving into the living room. I know he's having an affair, Tess said bluntly. Ruby's response was perfectly calibrated surprise, concern, denial. Tess, that's a serious accusation. Is it an accusation if it's true? I've seen the credit card statements, Ruby. The hotels. The restaurants. All the places he's been taking someone who isn't his wife. Even if that's true, why are you telling me? Because I think you know who she is. Another pause. James could picture Ruby calculating her response, trying to determine how much Tess actually knew. I'm not sure what you want me to say. I want you to tell me the truth. About you and Michael. The silence stretched long enough that James wondered if the wire had malfunctioned. Then Ruby spoke, her voice different now, colder, more honest. What do you want to know? Everything. How long it's been going on. What you've been planning. Planning? Don't play dumb, Ruby. I heard you talking yesterday. About making James look unstable. About getting him arrested. About the insurance money. James held his breath. This was the crucial moment. Would Ruby take the bait? You heard wrong. Did I? Then explain this. There was a rustling sound, then Ruby's sharp intake of breath. Where did you get that? Michael's laptop. He's not as careful as he thinks he is. James wished he could see what Tess was showing Ruby, but the audio feed would have to be enough. That's not what it looks like. Really? Because it looks like a life insurance policy on your husband. $2 million. With your name as the beneficiary. Lots of couples have life insurance. Dated last month? Right around the time you started telling people James was having mental health issues. Ruby was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice had lost all pretense. What do you want? I want in. What? You heard me. Michael's been lying to me for years, using me as cover while he screws around with other women. If you want to cash in on insurance money, then I want my cut. James felt a surge of admiration for Tess's performance. She was playing the bitter wife perfectly, appealing to Ruby's greed and her need for validation. I don't know what you're talking about. Ruby, we're past that now. I know about the gas leak. I know it failed. I know you're planning something else. How could you possibly? Because Michael tells me things when he's drunk. He thinks I'm too stupid to understand, but I'm not. He told me about the timer, about the basement, about how it was supposed to look like an accident. Ruby was breathing heavily now. James could hear the stress in her voice when she spoke. If you know all that, then you know what we're capable of. I'm counting on it. Michael took 5 years of my life. I want compensation. What kind of compensation? Half. Of everything. Ruby laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. You're insane. Am I? Without me, you have no way to eliminate James quietly. He's too smart, too careful. But with me helping, I can get close to him. I can make him trust me. And then we give him what he's been asking for since Afghanistan. A warrior's death. The words sent ice through James's veins. They were talking about killing him like he was an animal to be put down. You would do that? For half of $2.5 million? In a heartbeat. How? Tess's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. He'll be dead by Monday morning. One little accident, and I get everything. I'm just sorry the kids have to be in the house, but it's cleaner this way. James felt the world stop. Those were Ruby's words, exactly as she'd spoken them to Michael. Tess was feeding them back to her, getting her to agree, to confirm her willingness to murder children. The kids are already gone, Ruby said. James moved them somewhere safe after the gas leak failed. Then we bring them back. Make it look like a home invasion gone wrong. Random violence. Happens all the time in military families, PTSD, financial stress, tragic murder-suicide. Jesus, Tess. I never thought you had it in you. People surprise you. They talked for another 20 minutes, working out details, confirming the plan. Every word was being recorded. Every confession captured on digital audio that would hold up in any court in the country. When Tess finally left, James felt like he'd been holding his breath for hours. We got her, Hank said grimly. We got them both. James spent Sunday night organizing evidence. Photos of the gas leak device. Audio recordings of Ruby and Michael planning murder. Bank records Oliver had pulled from Ruby's phone showing suspicious deposits from Michael's accounts. GPS tracking data showing their secret meetings. The case was airtight, but James wanted to be absolutely certain. These people had tried to kill his children. There would be no second chances, no room for reasonable doubt. At dawn on Monday morning, he called the district attorney's office in Fort Collins. I need to report a conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud, he told the prosecutor, who answered. Sir, this sounds like something for local police. The suspects have been planning to murder me and my children for insurance money. I have recordings, financial evidence, and documented proof of attempted murder. The tone of the conversation changed immediately. What's your name, sir? James Danner. I'm a Marine veteran, and my wife just tried to murder me and my children for insurance money. Within 2 hours, the DA had contacted the FBI field office in Denver. Federal agents became involved due to the interstate nature of the financial fraud and the use of electronic communications in planning the crime. Agent Rebecca Torres sat in James's living room that afternoon, reviewing the evidence he'd compiled. She was an experienced agent with sharp eyes and an air of competence that reminded James of his best officers. Mr. Danner, this is extensive. My wife is smart and careful. I had to be smarter and more careful. Agent Torres looked up from the financial records. You said your children overheard the initial conversation. My son did. That's what tipped me off. Where are they now? Safe. Hidden. They'll stay that way until this is over. Agent Torres nodded approvingly. You've done good work here. Clean evidence, clear chain of custody. This should be enough for arrest warrants. When? Today. We'll coordinate with local law enforcement to pick up both suspects simultaneously. At 2 p.m., James received a text from Ruby, coming home early. We need to talk. He forwarded the message to Agent Torres and settled in a wait. Through his hidden cameras, he watched FBI agents take positions around his house. 2 unmarked cars, 6 agents, all waiting for Ruby to walk into the trap she'd set for him. Ruby arrived at 2:45, driving fast and parking crooked in the driveway. She burst through the front door with manic energy. James, where are you? Kitchen, he called. She appeared in the doorway, her face flushed and her eyes bright with excitement. We need to leave. Now. Today. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's perfect. I got us tickets to Cancun, leaving tonight. We can start over, just the 2 of us. James studied her face. What about the kids? They'll join us later, after we get settled. And my business? Forget the business. We don't need it anymore. Ruby moved closer, her hands reaching for him. James, I know things have been difficult between us, but that's all going to change. We're going to have the life we always dreamed of. With what money? Ruby's smile faltered for just a moment. I got a bonus at work. A big one. For processing insurance claims. It's complicated, but we have enough now. Enough to live anywhere we want, do anything we want. James nodded slowly. That's great news, Ruby. Let me just grab a few things. He moved toward the stairs, but Ruby caught his arm. No time. We'll buy everything new. Better than anything we have here. I need my passport. I already got it. It's in my purse. Of course she did. Ruby had thought of everything except the possibility that James might be 2 steps ahead of her. You seem nervous, he observed. Excited. Not nervous. But her hands were shaking, and she kept glancing toward the windows. Are you expecting someone? No. Why would you ask that? Because you keep looking outside like you're watching for something. Ruby forced a laugh. You're imagining things. The doorbell rang. Ruby went rigid, her face draining of color. Don't answer it. Why not? Because we need to leave. Now. But James was already walking toward the front door. Through the peephole, he could see Agent Shin standing on his porch with 2 other agents flanking her. FBI, Agent Shin called. We have a warrant for Ruby Danner. Behind him, James heard Ruby make a sound like a wounded animal. When he turned, she was backing toward the rear of the house, her eyes wide with panic. Ruby Danner. Agent Shin's voice was louder now. Come to the front door with your hands visible. Ruby ran. James opened the front door as Ruby disappeared through the kitchen toward the backyard. She's running out the back, he told Agent Torres. We have it covered. Through the kitchen window, James watched Ruby sprint across their backyard toward the fence that separated their property from the neighbors. She made it 3 steps before 2 FBI agents emerged from behind the garage. Federal agents. Stop and put your hands up. Ruby stopped. For a moment, she stood frozen in the middle of the yard, looking around like a trapped animal. Then she raised her hands and sank to her knees. Agent Torres walked past James into the house. Mrs. Danner, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, insurance fraud, and child endangerment. As they led Ruby away in handcuffs, she looked back at James one last time. The mask was completely gone now. The woman who stared at him was a stranger, cold, calculating, filled with pure hatred. "This isn't over," she said. James met her eyes without flinching. "Yes, it is." 20 minutes later, his phone rang. Agent Torres's voice was satisfied. "We picked up Michael Keener at his office. He tried to run too, but didn't get far." "Any problems?" "He had a gun. Didn't get a chance to use it, but the intent was clear." "We also found his computer, which contained detailed financial records of the fraud operation. Your wife wasn't his only target." James felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. "What happens now?" "Arraignment tomorrow. Trial in a few months. With the evidence you've provided, this should be straightforward." That evening, James called Oliver and Samantha to tell them it was safe to come home. Oliver took the news with grim satisfaction, but Samantha cried for an hour, not for Ruby, but for the mother she'd thought she'd had. "I don't understand," she sobbed against James's shoulder. "How could she want to hurt us?" James held his daughter close and wished he had answers that would make sense to a 14-year-old girl. But some kinds of evil couldn't be explained, only survived. "Some people break," he said finally, "and when they break, they become something else, something dangerous. Will we ever see her again?" James thought of Ruby's last words, the hatred in her eyes, the complete absence of remorse. "I hope not, sweetheart. I really hope not." The trial began 4 months later. James sat in the front row of the courtroom every day, watching as the prosecution methodically destroyed Ruby's defense. The evidence was overwhelming. Audio recordings of Ruby and Michael planning the murder. Photos of the gas leak device. Financial records showing insurance fraud. GPS data proving their secret meetings. Tessa's recorded confession where Ruby admitted to everything that Ruby's lawyer tried to claim temporary insanity, PTSD by proxy, even domestic abuse. But each defense crumbled under the weight of evidence that showed careful planning over months. This was not a crime of passion, the prosecutor argued in closing statements. This was a calculated, cold-blooded attempt to murder an entire family for financial gain. Mrs. Danner showed no regard for human life, not for her husband, and certainly not for her own children. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Ruby showed no emotion as the verdict was read. She sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead, while Samantha cried quietly beside James. Michael's trial was even shorter. Faced with the same evidence, plus additional charges of racketeering and financial fraud, he accepted a plea deal rather than risk life in prison, a T sentencing. Ruby finally spoke. "Your Honor, I want the court to know that I am not the monster the prosecution has made me out to be. I am a victim of circumstances, of a marriage that had become unbearable, of financial pressures that drove me to desperation." She never mentioned her children, never expressed remorse for planning their deaths. Even in her supposed apology, it was all about her. The judge was not impressed. "Mrs. Danner, I have reviewed the evidence in this case extensively. What you planned was not the act of a desperate woman. It was the act of someone who valued money more than human life. You were willing to murder your own children for insurance money. There is no circumstance that justifies such an act." Ruby was sentenced to 35 years in prison without possibility of parole. Michael received 18 years for fraud and conspiracy charges. As they led Ruby away for the final time, she looked directly at James. Her mouth moved silently, forming words only he could see. "I'll get out." James stared back at her with cold eyes and shook his head once. No, she wouldn't point. 1 year later, James stood in his newly expanded metal shop, watching Oliver work at the forge. His son had grown in the past year, taller, stronger, more confident. The trauma of Ruby's betrayal had marked him, but it hadn't broken him. Behind them, Samantha put the finishing touches on a mural that covered the entire back wall of the shop. Bold strokes of color depicted a family standing strong against dark storm clouds, with bright sunlight breaking through above them. At the bottom, in elegant script, she'd painted the title, "The Unbreakable." "Dad, check this out," Oliver said, pulling a knife blade from the fire. "I think I'm getting the hang of this." James examined his son's work. The blade was well-shaped, properly tempered, showing real skill. Not bad. Keep practicing. Samantha stepped back from her mural, paint on her hands, and a satisfied smile on her face. What do you think? James looked at the artwork his family portrayed in vibrant colors, standing together against all odds. It captured everything they'd been through and everything they'd become. Perfect, he said. Absolutely perfect. Dinner's ready, she announced. Uncle Hank made his famous chili. The three of them walked into the house where Hank was setting the table. James's brother had been clean and sober for over a year now, his life stabilized by purpose and family connection. Smells good, James said. Secret ingredient, Hank replied with a grin. Love and determination. They sat down to eat, and for the first time in years, James felt true peace. His children were safe. The threats to his family had been eliminated. Ruby and Michael were in prison where they belonged. After dinner, Oliver pulled out his laptop. Dad, I got accepted. To what? Criminal justice program at Colorado State. I want to be an FBI agent. Help catch people like Mom and Michael. James felt a surge of pride. Oliver had taken the worst experience of his life and turned it into motivation to help others. I'm proud of you, son. Samantha looked up from her sketchbook where she was drawing preliminary designs for her next mural. I'm thinking about art school, too. Maybe I can help other kids express their feelings through art. James smiled. Both his children had found ways to turn their trauma into purpose. Later that evening, after the kids had gone to bed, James and Hank sat on the front porch drinking coffee and watching the sunset. Any regrets? Hank asked. James considered the question. A year ago, he'd been married to a woman who wanted him dead. His family had been under threat from people he'd trusted. Now Ruby was in prison, Michael was in prison, and his children were safe and thriving. No, he said finally. No regrets. Even about Ruby. James thought about the woman he'd married, the mother of his children, the person he'd built a life with. All of it had been a lie. Ruby had never loved him. She'd seen him as a means to an end. And when he stopped being useful, she tried to dispose of him. Especially about Ruby. Hank nodded. Good. Some people don't deserve forgiveness. A car pulled into the driveway, and Tess Keener climbed out. She'd become a regular visitor over the past year. Someone who understood what it meant to be betrayed by the person you trusted most. Evening, boys, she said, climbing the porch steps. Hope I'm not interrupting. Never, James said. Coffee's fresh. Tess settled into a chair and accepted a mug from Hank. She looked good, healthier, stronger, more confident than she'd ever seemed during her marriage to Michael. Any word from the appeals court? She asked. Denied, James said. Ruby's lawyer tried to claim ineffective counsel, but the judge wasn't buying it. Good. She needs to stay where she is. They sat in comfortable silence. Three people who'd survived betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. You know what today is? Tess asked. What? 1 year since Thanksgiving. Since the day this all started. James had been trying not to think about it. 1 year since Oliver had pulled him into the pantry to overhear Ruby and Michael planning murder. 1 year since his world had exploded and he'd had to rebuild everything from scratch. Time for new traditions, Hank suggested. James nodded. Tomorrow they would have Thanksgiving dinner him, Oliver, Samantha, Hank, and Tess. A family forged not by blood or marriage, but by shared survival and mutual trust. To new traditions, James said, raising his coffee mug. To family, Tess added. To justice, Hank concluded, as the sun set over Fort Collins. James felt something he hadn't experienced in months' complete peace. Ruby was where she belonged. Michael was where he belonged. And James was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by people who'd proven their loyalty through fire. Some families were born. Others were made. His had been made through the crucible of betrayal and survival, and it was stronger than anything Ruby and Michael had ever tried to destroy. The forge in his garage bore a new sign now. Danner Forge, made under fire. Like his family, the best steel was forged in the hottest flames.